Stalingrad, a city built by steel and pride. The beating heart of Soviet industry, standing by the Volga River. Morning mist rolls over the rooftops, as if the city itself is still half asleep, unaware of what's coming. Workers walk to the factories, their faces covered in soot, their spirits steady. Children laugh on the riverbank, their wooden toy planes cutting through the morning air. Inside the steelworks, machines roar like thunder. Sparks fly, the rhythm of labor fills the day. For them, the war still feels far away, something that happens to other cities, other people. An old man reads the morning paper. Headlines speak of battles, but not of fear. In the market, women sell bread and apples. They smile, pretending life is still the same. Overhead, a train whistles. A soldier boards, waving to his mother, unaware it may be the last time. The factories breathe smoke into the cold air. It looks like strength, but soon it will look like ruin. Propaganda posters promise victory. The people believe they must. But whispers travel through the crowd. German tanks. They are moving east. Children look up as the sky darkens. Not clouds, but aircraft. The first distant hum of engines is a sound no one will ever forget. Women clutch their children. Men load sandbags at the building fronts. Soldiers prepare rifles in silence. The calm before the storm grows heavy. Across the Volga, smoke begins to rise. The enemy has reached the horizon. Factories continue to run, not just for work, but for survival. A radio crackles to life. Comrades, the front is near. The words spread like fire. People stop what they're doing, listening, frozen. At the harbor, ships load with supplies. Men shout orders through the fog. In homes, mothers pack suitcases. A doll, a loaf of bread, a prayer. School bells ring for the last time. Children run, not knowing they won't return. The sun sets over Stalingrad. The city looks peaceful, but it's an illusion. In the distance, faint explosions echo like thunder. The sky flashes orange, reflected on the Volga. Sirens begin to wail. People look up. Some scream, some stay silent. The ground trembles. The war has arrived. Bombs fall on the city's edge. Flames climb into the night. The air fills with smoke and screams. The morning's laughter is gone. Trains leaving the station are packed, not with workers, but refugees. A child presses her face to the window, watching her home disappear in the smoke. Back in the city, soldiers take positions. Each corner becomes a battlefield. From the rooftops, anti-aircraft guns open fire. The sky burns red. Factories collapse one after another. Steel and flesh melt together in the inferno. Civilians crawl through ruins, searching for loved ones. The dust hides both tears and blood. In the darkness, a woman whispers, "Stalingrad will never fall." Above the flames, the red flag still waves, a silent vow to endure the 200 days of hell that lie ahead. The summer of 1942. The German war machine rolls east, a storm of steel and dust sweeping across the steppe. Columns of tanks stretch to the horizon. Engines roar. The soldiers of the Wehrmacht believe victory is within reach. The sun blazes down on endless fields. Each mile brings them closer to a name that echoes through every radio in Berlin: Stalingrad. Above them, squadrons of Stuka dive bombers slice through the sky. Their sirens wail, the sound of death descending. In moments, the city on the Volga is engulfed in fire. Smoke covers the river like a shroud. Civilians flee through the streets. Mothers, children, the elderly. Their world collapsing around them. The air trembles with explosions. Factories that once forged steel now melt under the heat of war. The city burns for 3 days and nights. And yet, Stalingrad doesn't fall. The fire does not stop. Every day, the city wakes to the same sky, gray, filled with smoke and falling ash. What was once home now feels like another world. In the rubble, soldiers of the Red Army take up their rifles. They are ordered to hold the city, at any cost. From the west, the Germans advance street by street. From the east, across the Volga, reinforcements arrive under shell fire. The two forces collide inside the ruins. What was once a city becomes a maze of death. Buildings turn into fortresses. Every staircase, every floor, every room is a battlefield. Families are torn apart in seconds. There is no difference between soldier and civilian, only those who survive and those who don't. The Germans call it the Rat War, because every block must be captured inch by inch in blood and dust. The Red Army fights from the shadows, snipers watching through shattered windows. At night, the sky glows red from burning oil. By day, ash falls like snow. Inside the city, there is no silence, only the echo of boots, gunfire, and the screams of the trapped. Civilians crawl through ruins searching for food, for water, for the missing. Many never return. A mother shields her child beneath a collapsed roof. She whispers, "We will survive this." But survival becomes harder with each passing day. German artillery rains down relentlessly. The Volga itself is no refuge. Boats crossing the river are torn apart by air raids. Still, the supplies keep coming. Ammunition, bread, men. The Soviet defenders refuse to yield. Across the river, the Volga freezes. Boats drift, trapped in ice and fire. Men whisper prayers before crossing, knowing many will never reach the other side. Amid the chaos, a young sniper becomes legend, Vasily Zaitsev. His rifle echoes across the ruins, turning the tide one shot at a time. But even heroes cannot stop the inferno. By October, most of Stalingrad is gone. The streets are unrecognizable, just walls of ash, steel, and bone. German troops raise their flags over the wreckage, believing victory is at hand. Amid the ruins, courage becomes a quiet thing, a heartbeat, a breath. One man, one rifle, standing between life and death. Yet, deep within the ruins, Soviet banners still flutter. Every fallen house hides another soldier waiting to strike. The Germans grow weary. Winter is coming. They were promised a swift victory, but instead, they are trapped in a graveyard of their own making. The city that bears Stalin's name refuses to die. Smoke hides the truth of victory and loss. In Stalingrad, there are no heroes, only survivors. The city breathes, wounded but alive. And somewhere beneath the ruins, hope still burns.
Winter, 1942, arrived like a silent executioner. Cold swept across Stalingrad, burying the ruins under a blanket of ice and ash. For soldiers and civilians trapped inside the broken city, survival became a battle of its own. The wind cut like knives through torn uniforms. Frost clung to eyelashes and rifles alike. Every breath felt like inhaling shards of glass. Food had become a memory. Water froze before it could be lifted to a soldier's lips. Men tore pages from books just to light a fire that lasted only seconds. Yet the fighting did not stop. In the ruins of shattered factories and apartment blocks, men crawled through holes blasted into walls, turning every room, every stairwell, every basement into a battleground. The city had no front line anymore. Battle came from every direction. from above as buildings collapsed, from shadows where snipers waited in silence, from beneath as soldiers crept through tunnels and darkness deeper than night. Weeks turned into months, and those months became a blur of smoke, hunger, and terror. Soviet soldiers huddled together in burned-out rooms, sharing a single crust of frozen bread and whispering stories of home to keep their spirits alive. German soldiers shivered in open trenches, their greatcoats stiff with frost, their hands numb, their hope fading with each sunless day. A city once filled with factories and life had become a maze of ice and death. Tanks lay frozen in place like metal skeletons. Trucks were abandoned, half buried beneath deep snow. The screams of the wounded echoed through long nights until even the echoes grew tired. Inside a ruined warehouse, a Soviet medic stitched wounds by candlelight, his hands trembling from cold and exhaustion. Every stitch was a fragile act of hope. Every life saved felt like a victory greater than any captured street. Across the lines, German soldiers burned furniture and doors just to stay alive a little longer, but the flames offered little warmth and no comfort. As the winter deepened, disease spread faster than any shell or rifle. Men collapsed from hunger long before battle reached them. The dead were covered with snow where they fell, their shapes slowly disappearing beneath the endless white. Through it all, the Volga River remained a frozen lifeline. Across its icy surface, Soviet reinforcements crawled under the cover of night, dragging ammunition, food, and sometimes the wounded back across the ice. The river became both a pathway and a grave. Still, the defenders held, against exhaustion, against cold, against despair itself. And then came the snipers. Among them, one name whispered through the ruins: Vasily Zaitsev. His rifle spoke with deadly precision, each shot echoing through the ruined streets like a cold promise of resistance. He did not fight for glory. He fought to protect the living, to honor the dead, and to remind the invaders that Stalingrad still had teeth German snipers answered, turning the shattered buildings into a deadly game of shadows. Hours passed in silence as they watched each other through broken windows. One breath, one heartbeat at a time, only one would survive these duels. But even victory tasted like ash. Elsewhere across the ruins, men fought at distances so close that the cold air carried the sound of their breathing. Grenades echoed through empty hallways. Boots scraped across debris-covered floors. Voices whispered in darkness as soldiers tried to distinguish friend from foe in a city where every corner hid danger. Nights stretched endlessly, broken only by distant explosions and the soft crunch of snow beneath weary boots. A soldier might enter a building with 20 comrades and leave with only 2. Such was life inside Stalingrad's frozen maze. By midwinter, both armies were barely human. Gaunt faces, hollow eyes, trembling hands, weak from hunger and numb from cold. And yet, in the darkest corners of the city, small moments of humanity flickered. A soldier sharing the last crumb of bread. Another placing his coat over a wounded comrade. A quiet lull in the fighting, allowing men to hear the wind instead of gunfire. These moments did not win battles, but they kept hope alive. The city itself seemed to breathe. A wounded animal refusing to die. German officers wrote in journals about the unbearable cold, the relentless Soviet attacks, the dwindling supplies. Some wrote letters home they would never send. Soviet soldiers, equally exhausted, held positions simply because there was nowhere left to fall back to. They fought with courage, born from desperation, and the knowledge that behind them lay the families they fought to protect. By January, the German 6th Army was trapped, encircled in a pocket of ruins, snow, and shattered hope. Reinforcements would not come. Supplies would not arrive. Rescue was impossible. The frozen streets became prisons, the ruins became tombs, and the sky above, once filled with the roar of aircraft, became empty. Inside the pocket, officers issued orders that no longer mattered. Their men were dying faster from cold and hunger than from Soviet gunfire. A loaf of bread was worth more than ammunition. A cup of hot water felt like a miracle. And still, Stalingrad's defenders pushed forward with relentless determination. Every street became a symbol. Every block a battlefield. Every ruined house a fortress. The Soviet forces tightened the noose with methodical, crushing precision. Yet even as the pocket shrank, German soldiers clung to a final hope, the belief that their high command would save them. But salvation never came. Days slipped by in bitter cold. Nights felt endless. Men collapsed where they stood, their bodies claimed by winter. The ring grew smaller. The end drew closer. In the final days, the once proud German Sixth Army was reduced to scattered groups huddled inside basements and cellars, waiting for the inevitable. For 200 days and nights, Stalingrad had endured hell. But now the tide had turned. The defenders had survived the worst the world could offer, and the invaders, once confident in their victory, now faced the truth that history would never forget. Stalingrad had not fallen. The city had endured. The people had endured. And through endurance, they had changed the course of the entire war. In the final months of 1942, when hope seemed buried beneath the snow and ruins of Stalingrad, a new plan began to form deep within the Soviet command. A plan bold enough to change the course of the war and risky enough to fail before it even began. This plan had a name whispered only in secure rooms and coded messages: Operation Uranus. It would not strike the strongest points of the German lines. Instead, it would strike the weakest. The flanks defended not by the hardened Wehrmacht, but by the overstretched armies of Romania, Italy, and Hungary. While the Germans pushed relentlessly toward the center of Stalingrad, the Soviets gathered strength in silence. Train after train arrived through blizzards and frozen nights, unloading tanks, men, ammunition. Fresh divisions, hardened by winter and driven by the determination to liberate a city on the brink of death. The German Sixth Army believed the Soviets were nearly finished. They didn't see the storm gathering beyond the horizon. And then, on a bitter November morning, the sky erupted. Artillery thundered across the steppe, shaking the frozen ground with hundreds of simultaneous blasts. The bombardment rolled like a wave, a deafening signal that the tide of war was turning. From the white haze of snow and smoke, Soviet tanks surged forward, T-34s, their engines roaring in the icy air, cut through the defensive lines with brutal efficiency. Infantry followed close behind, moving swiftly across the frozen plains, their footsteps muffled by snow, their breath rising like steam in the cold. Romanian lines collapsed under the weight of the assault. In hours, entire positions were swept aside. What the Germans had believed unbreakable now broke with alarming speed. For the first time since the battle began, the invaders felt fear. As the Soviets advanced from the north and south, a vast encirclement began to take shape. It grew hour by hour, a tightening ring of steel and determination closing around Stalingrad itself. Inside the city, the German Sixth Army continued fighting, unaware of the trap forming around them. Smoke and snow obscured the battlefield, but even through the blizzard, one fact became undeniable. The hunters were becoming the hunted. On the third day of the Soviet offensive, German commanders realized the truth. The path west, their lifeline, was gone. They were surrounded. Tens of thousands of soldiers now stood isolated in a frozen wasteland of ruined factories, broken streets, and crumbling hope. The Soviet offensive did not stop. Columns of tanks pushed deeper, meeting little resistance as they sealed the last escape routes. Engineers built makeshift bridges across icy streams. Infantry marched without rest, and artillery moved close enough to strike at the heart of the trapped army. Within days, The encirclement was complete. It was vast, a ring stretching dozens of kilometers across the snow-covered steppe. A ring too strong to break and too cold to survive. Inside the pocket, German morale collapsed. Officers issued orders that no longer mattered. Supplies dwindled. Roads vanished beneath winter storms. Desperation grew with every passing hour. For the Soviets, victory was no longer a dream. It was becoming reality. But it came at a cost paid in blood, frostbite, and unending exhaustion. Soldiers who had fought for months in the ruins now pushed forward with renewed purpose. Their faces, hardened by ice and loss, reflected the grim determination to end this nightmare once and for all. By late December, the once mighty German Sixth Army was reduced to pockets of resistance scattered across the frozen ruins. Their radios crackled with broken messages, their supplies were nearly gone, and their hope had turned to ash. The Soviets closed in from all directions, methodical, relentless, unstoppable. Operation Uranus had not only succeeded, it had reshaped the entire Eastern Front. And as the noose tightened, one truth became clear to the world. Stalingrad was no longer a battle. It was a turning point, a moment where an entire war shifted, and a defeated people rose from destruction to reclaim their future. The counterattack had begun, and nothing could stop it now. By January 1943, the once mighty German Sixth Army had become a shadow of itself. The soldiers who had marched confidently toward the Volga months earlier now stood freezing, starving, and surrounded in the ruins of Stalingrad. The winter showed no mercy. Snow drifted through shattered rooftops, filling rooms that had once been homes, factories, and shelters. Now they were graves inside bunkers. Officers huddled around dim lanterns, their faces pale, their hands trembling from cold and hopelessness. Maps lay spread across tables, but the lines on those maps no longer offered solutions. Only reminders of how little remained. Radio transmissions grew weaker each day. Static replaced orders. Hope was replaced by silence. Across the frozen ruins, German soldiers wrapped themselves in blankets taken from abandoned houses, trying to stay alive for one more night. Some clutched letters from home, their corners worn from being read over and over in the dim light of burning paper scraps. Outside, the Soviet encirclement tightened like a steel ring. Every path out of the city was gone. Every supply line cut. The German army had become a prisoner of its own ambition. Yet still, many refused to accept the truth. They waited for relief, for reinforcements that would never arrive, for aircraft that could no longer break through the snow-filled skies, for promises that had long since evaporated into the cold air. Hunger gnawed at every man. Frostbite claimed fingers, toes, and lives long before shells or bullets reached them. The dead were covered in snow where they fell, their forms blending into the frozen city. Inside the Red Army positions, soldiers watched the suffering across the lines with a mixture of sorrow and grim resolve. They understood hunger, they understood cold. But they also understood what this battle meant for their families, their homeland, their survival. Day by day, the resistance weakened. Surrender began quietly. A group of German soldiers emerged from a basement, hands raised, their faces hollow. Others followed, slowly at first, then in growing numbers. They carried no weapons now, only the weight of defeat. Soviet troops approached cautiously, but there was no fight left in the frozen figures trembling before them. War had drained every last drop of strength, leaving behind only exhausted men who longed for warmth, food, and the chance to live. In the heart of the trapped army, General Friedrich Paulus sat inside a cold, dim bunker. He stared at maps that had lost meaning, at officers who waited for a decision that could no longer be delayed. Outside, Stalingrad whispered the same truth over and over through the howling wind. It is over. On February 2nd, 1943, the message finally reached every corner of the ruined city. The surrender was complete. The German Sixth Army, the pride of Hitler's Eastern campaign, was no more. Tens of thousands of prisoners began the slow, painful walk through snow-covered streets, passing the ruins of factories, schools, and homes that had once defined the industrial heart of the Soviet Union. Some limped, some leaned on each other, some simply stared at the ground, their minds numb from months of suffering. Soviet soldiers watched them pass, maintaining discipline, but unable to ignore the human cost etched into every weary step. The guns grew silent. The smoke slowly faded. And for the first time in 200 days, Stalingrad felt the faint echo of peace. Civilians emerged from cellars and basements, faces thin, eyes hollow, but alive. They walked carefully through the ruins, searching for neighbors, searching for family, searching for whatever remained of the lives they once knew. Some found familiar faces. Others found only silence. The city was broken, but it had endured. And in its endurance, a new chapter began. Amid the devastation, men and women began clearing rubble, lifting stones, rebuilding walls with hands cracked from winter. It was slow work, painful, exhausting, endless. But each stone lifted was a declaration. We are still here. The Battle of Stalingrad had ended, but its aftermath would shape generations. The cost had been unimaginable, the suffering immeasurable, and yet from the ruins, life would begin again. For now, the city stood in solemn silence, its broken buildings illuminated by a pale winter sun, and in that light, one truth remained. In Stalingrad, there were no victors, only survivors. When the smoke finally cleared and the guns fell silent, Stalingrad lay in ruins. A city once alive with steel, industry, and the rhythm of everyday life had been reduced to broken walls, frozen streets, and memories whispered through the wind. But even in destruction, something survived. Something stronger than fire, stronger than winter, stronger even than war itself. It was the spirit of the people. In the first days after the battle, civilians emerged cautiously from the cellars where they had lived for months. Their faces were thin, their eyes tired. But within those eyes burned the quiet strength of those who had endured the unendurable. They stepped slowly through the ruins, searching for loved ones, searching for signs of life, searching for anything that could begin the process of healing. The city was silent, not with the silence of surrender, but with the silence of survival. And then, the rebuilding began. Piece by piece, brick by brick, people gathered what remained of their world and started shaping a new one. Men lifted stones with frost-bitten hands. Women cleared rubble from the streets. Children collected pieces of wood and metal, transforming debris into hope. There were no machines at first, no grand plans, only determination and the deep unspoken belief that a city capable of enduring such suffering deserved to live again. Gradually, walls rose from the frost. Factories were repaired and reopened. Schools welcomed children once more, their laughter echoing across streets that had been silent for so long. And as Stalingrad rebuilt, it remembered. Monuments rose from the ashes. Simple at first, then grand. Each one a reminder of the sacrifices made and the lives lost. Cemeteries stretched across the hills, rows upon rows of wooden crosses covered in snow and warmed only by the hands that placed flowers at their base. Survivors visited the ruins where they once lived, touching the walls, whispering the names of those who never returned. Some stood in silence, others knelt, all remembered. Years passed, and the scars of war slowly faded. but they never disappeared. The city grew again, its streets filled with people, its factories humming with life, its river flowing quietly under the rising sun. Stalingrad, reborn as Volgograd, became a symbol not only of victory but of endurance, of resilience, of the human spirit's ability to rebuild even after the darkest of nights. And atop the Mamayev Kurgan, the towering statue known as the Motherland Calls lifted her sword to the sky. A monument, not to war, but to the promise that such suffering should never happen again. Visitors came from around the world. They walked among the memorials, stood before the eternal flame, and felt the weight of history in every stone and every whisper of wind. Some came to honor ancestors, some came to understand the past, all left changed. Because Stalingrad is not just a place, it is a lesson, etched in ice, fire, and sacrifice. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, humanity can find strength, and that from the ruins of war, a city, a people, a nation can rise again. Today, the Volga flows quietly through a city rebuilt, its waters reflecting lights instead of flames, its banks filled with families, children, and the rhythm of life restored. And as the sun sets over Volgograd, casting golden light across the rebuilt skyline, one truth remains. The world may remember the battle, but the people remember the cost. And through memory, Stalingrad lives forever.